So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
Welcome, welcome. It is great to be with you today, diving into topics, everything from socialism and why so many young people, especially millennials, love socialism, and is that what they really actually want? We'll talk about also with this, the Biden administration has approved the largest permanent boost to food stamps in the United States history. We'll tie all of this to, again, the topic of socialism and what young people want today. We'll also talk about death, as John Travolta has recently discussed the death of his wife, Kelly Preston, with his son, his 10-year-old son, and it's interesting for all of us to ponder death, especially within the context of John Travolta and his family, having lost a son at 16, a wife at only 57, and what fears that may have brought into his life and his son's life. So we'll discuss that today on the show, as well as Muppet Babies. Muppet Babies are now encouraging, get this, cross-dressing. The Muppet Babies are encouraging you to be a cross-dresser if you are a child. I just can't understand this. You need to hear what's happening. I'll fill you in on that and more here during our weekly, daily show of Trending. If you'd like to subscribe to the podcast, head over to relevantradio.com/trending. You can share this episode with a friend. Joining me in just a little bit will be Father Robert Sirico, the founder and president of Acton Institute. Right now I want to talk about how Gen Z actually wants to talk about faith. There's this new Barna Group study, which Barna Group is known for some of their studies surrounding faith and how people are responsive to faith. Now, this new study conducted among Gen Z in both the United States and in Canada. And there were some pretty fascinating things that vary from my generation, the millennials. If you don't already know this, the millennials aren't really big fans of sharing about their faith. In fact, they're often opposed to sharing about their faith, or they're extremely conflicted. Now, Gen Z, that's totally different. Now, just so you know, those who are considered Gen Z were born after 1996, so they're just approaching their 25th birthdays. Now, Gen Z, within this specific study, it was looking at high school age Gen Z. So specifically, current age 13 to 18-year-olds. Now, to put this into context, these 13 to 18-year-olds were born between the commonplace camera phone and the iPhone. So in other words, they were born in a generation that was familiar with regular use of photos, and they came of age with iPhones being the norm because they grew up and were born right around when iPhones were coming. So here's what's fascinating. When you look at some of what's happening with Gen Z, they actually want to talk about faith. But when we say they want to talk about faith, they want a personal witness. They want action over words. They don't want to become someone's project, but would rather become their friend, experience the hospitality of another, and be listened to. Now, in their opinion and comments when it comes to social media and evangelization, they don't think that sharing a post on social media is evangelizing, which I thought was really interesting. Quite interesting, because this is a generation that has grown up with social media being a part of their everyday life. Now, by the way, they're all about TikTok. You should know this. They do actually a lot of their very own TikTok evangelization. But I have to emphasize how important it is that we understand they don't want to be evangelized, in the respect that they don't want their arguments and thinking to be picked apart. They want friendship. They don't want smart and lofty ideas, smart and lofty arguments. What's at the core of this for Gen Z? Why are they so open to God and talking about God but they don't want to be evangelized or looked at as a project because they want friendship. But they also are starving for good examples. You see, I think part of this touches on the crisis that we're seeing of loneliness even among teenagers. You see, some of the studies are showing that, in fact, teenagers have a fierce desire for relationships. They're fiercely relational, as I've heard some people say about Gen Z. Now, another kind of interesting thing, if we're to compare the millennial generation and Gen Z, again, millennials are those born prior to 1996. And Gen Z is after 1996. Now, for millennials specifically, if you disagree with them, they're going to feel judged by you. They're going to think of you as someone who's judging them. So, in other words, let's say you voted for someone else for president. Or let's say you do or don't believe in God and you're opposed to my moral, religious, spiritual, political outlook. Well, because you disagree with me, I'm going to assume you're judging me. This is the common millennial mindset. But this study is showing that, in fact, Gen Z is a little different. In fact, 8 out of 10 Gen Zers, those born after 1996, actually reject this idea. They actually, get this, believe that you can think something different politically, spiritually, morally, and that doesn't mean that you're rejecting them. Does bring a question, although we're not talking about millennials at this moment. Why is it that millennials are so sensitive that if you disagree with them on their worldview, political view, moral view, anything, that you're rejecting them, that you're judging them? Let's come back to this focus, though, for Gen Z on how they want to be evangelized. They want to talk about God. They would love things such as praying together. They want to hear people's stories. They want to hear about people's conversions and encounter with God. They have this profound desire for connection. In fact, 8 out of 10 Gen Zers are talking about how important it is to share your faith. Now, of course, this is among Christian Gen Z, but it's quite profound that so many young 13 to 18-year-olds, because that's at the heart of the study here, really do want to hear about God and share about Him. Now, something interesting that I didn't know this about this generation, but today's 13 to 18-year-olds are actually hyper considerate when it comes to conversations. I wonder if this is because they've grown up around such an atmosphere of animosity, of disagreement. Perhaps they are learning to be greater peacekeepers while at the same time battling that loneliness and desire for connection. Again, they want to be connected, fiercely related to and engaged with. They love, get this, physical presence and actually being present to one another, aka working on distraction. So what are some of the takeaways of this study? I think first and foremost, we need to recognize that each generation is a little different, but things don't change that much. People want to be befriended. They want to have personal encounters with other people who are Christian to teach them about God, to share how God has transformed their lives, helped them through challenges, and brought great joy and beauty into their day-to-day. Nothing's changed, but perhaps Gen Zs recognize this a little sooner. You see, this is what we are called to do. Our takeaway is that we must show others, specifically Gen Z, what we believe by who we are. Not by the perfect argument, not by critiquing their thinking. Yes, those things are great, but it shows the importance of friendship, relationship, and ultimately witness. That's what the new evangelization is. That's what you and I are called to. I think there's one thing that we have an advantage of when it comes to, I would say, even our Protestant brothers and sisters in this sense. We have the lives of the saints to help young people have a personal encounter with those people who have walked before us, who have known Jesus and have been transformed by His lives. They want to know our stories about being converted and growing in faith, but they also want to know the stories of the saints if they only knew about them. So here's our challenge. We have to work through the hypocrisy of our behavior. We have to be humble, honest, and forthcoming with our faults. because the next generation is watching, and it may lead to a yay or nay when it comes to religion, Catholicism, and where they'll direct their entire lives toward. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. Joining me now is Father Robert Sirico. Father Robert Sirico is the founder and president of Acton Institute, based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And his organization focuses on promoting the free market through Judeo-Christian principles. And today I want to dive into the topic of now millennials and what they think about everything from socialism and social programs. Welcome to Trending, Father Sirico.
Really great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
The Biden administration recently approved what's the largest permanent boost to food stamps here in the United States, in the history of the United States, in fact. And it's interesting, Father Sirico, because this is a 25% permanent increase. It'll take effect in October. Now, many millennials believe this is charity. This is a good thing. I think about millennials today, and they view their act of charity often as what happens in the voting booth. They think government assistance is necessary to help people live and thrive, and it really makes me ponder, why do you believe young people love socialism, and what are they missing here?
Well, you've really identified it. I think young people love socialism first and foremost because they think it is social. They think that it reflects a social consciousness, a reciprocal responsibility that we have for other people. And those ideals, those virtues are praiseworthy and ought to be lauded. The problem is that socialism isn't the way to achieve those goals, that in point of fact, socialism breaks down human solidarity. We know this, and this gets to the second point as to the vulnerability of many young people. The second point is that history shows us that socialism breaks down human solidarity, that people become more isolated, more selfish because they have less abundance in their life, less sustainability for their existence, and so they kind of turn inward. We all become, it's as simple as becoming irritable when we're hungry or thirsty, right? We protect ourselves when we're ill. When the society is ill, when it's not functioning well, when it's not producing, we tend to become more selfish. And what socialism has done, and this is the historical point that I think a lot of young people don't get, is to look at the experiments in socialism on a large scale, whether it's the former Soviet Empire or even what's going on in Korea or Venezuela or Cuba, and what in a different way is happening in China. So those would be some of the reasons that I think there's a misunderstanding.
Interesting. So kind of a caveat to this, because some people will try to classify different types of socialism. So they'll say, well, we don't want to be like the socialists, let's say, in Cuba or Venezuela, but we like the socialists in Sweden. What's your response to this kind of classification of socialism that so many millennials are starting to try to use?
Well, first of all, the Swedish will be among the first to tell you they're not socialists. They have a system that is largely democratic, that it has certain features of the welfare state, but it is not at all an abolition of private property, which is the essential definition of what socialism is. The confusion about what socialism isn't just this generation's confusion. I remember a quotation from Winston Churchill going back to, I think it was 1908, and he said, the socialism of the early Christians said, everything that I own is yours. The modern socialism, but by which he meant the beginning of the 20th century, the modern socialists say that everything that you have is mine. And that's the real difference.
Wow. Talk about the I generation. You have everything that should belong to me. And in respect, right. This is where I think the food stamp conversation has the first thing is that we're seeing a 25% increase in food stamps pushed forward by the current Biden administration. And again, many young people are saying, well, this is great because we're seeing something, Father Sirico, such as so many young people today who are choosing to stay on unemployment. They love the idea of food stamps during COVID, and they're having a blast during this COVID pandemic traveling the world.
Right. And this can go on for a while. I mean, the Soviet Union could sustain itself for 70 years until it ate up everything. And then it couldn't sustain itself anymore. I think Margaret Thatcher once said that socialism's fine until you run out of other people's money. And this is the thing. If we don't have a system that's producing wealth, and the production of wealth isn't just about having more toys and more gadgets and more things, but it's the process of human production, which is what you were touching on there, where people aren't engaged in work. Their sense of themselves, their sense of self-esteem, their sense of respect, both for themselves and for other people, begins to diminish. And now I think one of the potentially worst legacies of the pandemic, and it's not so much the pandemic, but the social and economic political response to it, is going to be the erosion of the work ethic. We can't find people to work anymore because they've grown unaccustomed to work and to the relationship of work to having the resources and the things that we need to make lives easier for people. And that affects the poor first and foremost. You can talk about these subsidies in the form of food stamps, but at some point somebody has to pay for that, and that's going to be the children and the grandchildren of this very generation that's enjoying it now.
Let's talk a little bit about subsidiarity. If you're just joining us, you're listening to Trending with Timmerie. Joining me now is the founder and president of Acton Institute. They're promoting Judeo-Christian principles that promote a free market. You can find them at acton.org. That's ACTON.org. We'll post a link to that in the show notes at relevantradio.com/trending. If you're not familiar with the idea of subsidiarity, it's something very specific that we talk about within the Catholic context of understanding how we as people of faith relate not just to the government and the market, but to our local communities. Father Sirico, can you talk a little bit about subsidiarity and how this is very helpful for current millennials who are struggling with the idea of socialism?
I'm so glad you brought up subsidiarity because it's a wonderful way of thinking about a problem. This is one of these instances where it's not so much telling you what to think, but how to think. And really, when you do think about it, it becomes very clear. It's common sense. Subsidiarity basically says that needs are best met at the most local level of their existence. So that if there's a need in my life, I'm the first one that has the responsibility to meet that need. I'm thirsty. Well, I need to get up and get a drink of water. If there's a breakdown, let's say I'm sick or I can't get out of bed, then the next most proximate people to me are the ones first to help me. My parents or my spouse or whoever it happens to be in my household. When there's a breakdown in a whole family, then it's the families closest to them, neighbors who relate to people in need. Perhaps there's a breakdown in a whole neighborhood. Then institutions come into play, like the local parish or mediating institutions like charities and the like. Maybe even a city acts to meet the needs of people. And then it goes up to higher levels of government. But the principle of subsidiarity says that needs are best met because on the most local level, that's where people know people best.
Right.
And when they do meet their needs, a bond forms between people.
And
As it gets more abstract, Go ahead.
Yes. No. Well, I was just going to give an example of this too, like in terms of systems such as roads. If we have this universal attitude across the nation that because there are hard winters, that we should replace and reconstruct all of the roads, repave them every year. Well, that's going to be a waste of time in Southern California, where it's an arid desert
Right.
and we don't get a lot of rain and the roads don't have a ton of damage. But if you're in a mountainous region, if you're in the Midwest with tons of rain, that does make sense, and we would be wasting
Yes.
time and even damaging a work ethic to be doing work that wasn't necessary. We'd fail to see the purpose in our work. And so that's another example of subsidiarity. A local government should be able to help determine what the local needs are of the people, of the various systems of road work. And all of these examples are really important that people just don't quite understand when it comes to government and socialism.
I think that's an excellent example of the application of subsidiarity. Another thing about subsidiarity, it says that while it is justifiable for interventions to take place in the case of emergencies or manifest failures, it also says that that assistance should be removed as soon as
Mm.
possible, so as
Mhm.
not to become permanently a fixture of society. That subsidiarity, the very word subsidium, means to help, to assist, not to replace. And that's another feature of subsidiarity. Let's think too that this is not just about material needs. It's also about human bonding, human families. Sometimes, and very often, the most deep things, the most profound things that people need are not just material needs, but human bonding, love,
Mm.
family, challenge, moral example, those kinds of things that are intangible.
You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. That's Father Robert Sirico, the founder and president of Acton Institute. We're going to come back in just a minute here, and we're going to discuss what young people need from the church, and we'll also discuss the idea of subsidiarity and socialism in relation to current COVID assistance. Catholic Order of Foresters is proud to sponsor the Relevant Radio studio line. For information about employment opportunities and flexible premium life insurance plans, visit relevantradio.com/forester.
Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
During COVID, we've seen everything from the ability to not have to pay on your student loans to not even having to pay your house payment at times. Or you can't be evicted for not paying rent. Some people love that the government has given this assistance. Other people say this could be a bigger problem. Joining me now here on Trending, we're talking about socialism and millennials. This is almost kind of the perfect storm in the minds of many millennials that the government is helping us more and more in our day-to-day living. Joining me now to discuss this is Father Robert Sirico. He's the founder and president of Acton Institute. You can find them at acton.org, promoting Judeo-Christian principles that bring about a free market. Father Sirico, what are your thoughts on the ongoing COVID assistant programs and how this has continued to fuel a confusing understanding between the young person today, especially millennials, and the government?
Well, what I encourage people to do is just take a step back, because right now we are so clogged with money. Our society, so many resources have been made available across the board, that what if we were to step back a year and a half at the beginning of this? Undoubtedly, there was a need to stimulate the economy. People couldn't associate as intimately as they were able to for commerce and education and other purposes. So we needed something to stimulate the economy. What if back then, before all of these trillions and trillions of dollars of stimulus packages were passed, The government instead said, we are going to declare a tax holiday so that all of the taxes that landlords have to pay, that businesses have to pay, that individuals have to pay, uh, would not be due. That the government
Do
and
my
you
taxes,
they
I would
could
be
have.
glad to get rid of.
Sure, but imagine how that would have stimulated the economy from the bottom up rather than from the top down. Instead, what we've done is passed a series of stimulus measures totaling trillions and trillions of dollars, which, need I remind everybody, is going to have to be paid back in one way or another.
Right, right.
And and what we've done is empowered the politicians to distribute that money.
Mm-hmm.
So what ends up happening is you have whole states in this country, cities in this country that have money they don't know what to do with, and they
Mm-hmm.
have to pay it. I lost my sister, not due to COVID, but she died in the midst of it all,
I'm
and
so
about
sorry.
and she didn't have a lot of resources and stuff, and I paid for her funeral. A month later, I got a letter from FEMA. This is the Federal Emergency Management Association, whatever it's called, uh, asking me to submit all of the bills for my sister's funeral that involved the coffin and the burial and the clergy. They even had that on there. It didn't cost me anything for clergy. And the transfer of the body and the grave and everything else. If I would just submit that, I would get reimbursed for it under this emergency situation having to do with COVID. Now, my sister didn't die of COVID. And they said in the bottom, now, all you have to do to change the birth certificate is to go online here, here, and here
The
and do
death
all of this. It
certificate?
would, yeah, I'm sorry, I
Interesting.
said the birth certificate, the death certificate. And I could have received reimbursement for the entire thing. How tempting that was to do. But then I thought to myself,
Right.
why should I have somebody in Iowa
Yes.
paying
Yeah.
for my sister's funeral?
Mm-hmm.
It just seems so unjust. And I give that just as a slight example on a much larger level nationally.
Yes.
This is going on as we speak. And politicians are, in effect, buying the favor of constituents, buying their votes, in effect,
Mm-hmm.
uh, by all of this. The churches have received millions of dollars, billions of dollars, uh, in order to keep various things going, all of which was, it's good. I'm glad they're still going. But there's going to
Mm-hmm.
be a consequence for this.
Yeah.
And that's my point. I think there was a better way to do this than the way we chose.
Well, and this brings us back to the whole idea of socialism as well, because the story you just told, it was essentially the government robbing you off through an offer, a generous offer, robbing you of the opportunity to be charitable toward your family, to sacrifice for your family. And I think that this
Exactly.
is the challenge for millennials today. They love government assistance to such an extent they've lost the sense of hard work and work ethic, which you've mentioned, but also they've been robbed of their opportunity to be charitable toward others. So this makes me beg the question, what is the role of the Catholic Church in all of this to help rebuild a proper understanding of charity and economic welfare in our nation?
Well, I have a big idea about this, and it's not going to sit well with a lot of people. And here's what I'm saying. When a church, when you consider Christianity in our origin, we did not begin as a big religion. We were a Jewish sect. And then even when the temple was collapsed and there was the diaspora and we were under Roman domination, we were, persecuted for 400 years. But then what happened is we became the religion of the state. And as evangelization went forward, we evangelized the world, and through our institutions of charity and education and enterprise and all the rest of it, we come down to the present moment, and we have been very comfortable in Europe, in the United States, and much of the world because we've run all these institutions. We've had great influence in society. Those days are gone. The church doesn't have a lot of credibility with young people today.
Yeah.
And what we need to do, and then we need to think about how we handled that power. I think one of the greatest tragic moments in history is the church in Ireland. When I was growing up, the Irish, everybody went to church. Almost
Yes.
100% of the Irish people went to Mass
I was
on a
shocked
regular
when I went
basis.
to Ireland like 9 years ago, and the churches were
Empty.
empty, and I think Mass was a record. I was still praying. The introductory prayers in Mass was over. It was like 11 minutes long. I couldn't
Right.
believe
Yeah.
it.
Even in Brooklyn, in my day, the Irish priests were always good at that. But my point is that we have to really reconsider our whole role in the world, not as rulers, but as friends and as servants. And that means our attitude toward young people who come to us who are different, who have a whole different set of preconceptions, of presuppositions, and we need to listen and to love, and not in any way to surrender the truth of things, but to have enough confidence that the truth of things is compelling on its own merits, that doesn't need our coercion or our arrogance to reinforce. So I think this is really what we have to do. We have to reconsider the whole way we do it. Our bishops should not be preoccupied with our institutions. And I'm afraid they are. And I understand why they are, because I was a pastor. I got to make sure the school runs. I got to make sure the bills are paid. But I think more important than that is our attitude toward people and our willingness to risk the institutions for the sake of people. When we do that radically, we will readopt the mentality of the first century, which caused the evangelization of the entire Western world.
It's fascinating what you're saying, because before you joined me, we were talking about a recent study that was done on Gen Z. And some of what was said about Gen Z is they don't want sound and lofty arguments. They want personal relationships. They want personal engagement.
Right.
They are obsessed with that interpersonal communication and actually being present with one another. You'd think that they're fine with texting each other from across the room, but they want that present awareness of one another.
Of course they do.
And this is what you're saying, that the church is called to push forward. Yet it's so easy for people, especially I think millennials and even Gen Z, to kind of look at the church of like, oh, well, I just have to lose myself by thinking the exact way they think, rather than understanding how we're called to live and how empowering that is in the sense of charity and responsibility for others.
Young people in every generation are the most idealistic of the entire populace. And yet, so often what religious institutions have done has been to play not to their idealism, but to their immaturity. And young people know that they're immature because they're young. They have a lot to learn. What you do is set before them an ideal and call them to that ideal, and urge them, as St. John Paul II did, which is why he was so effective with young people, urge them not to settle for mediocrity. And I think that's what we need to do. But in order to do that, we have to have supreme confidence in the veracity of the gospel of Christ.
That's Father Robert Sirico here on Trending with Timmerie. You can find his organization at the Acton Institute at acton.org. Again, that's acton.org, ACTON. We'll post a link on social media in the show notes for today's show. Thank you so much for joining us, Father Sirico. We look forward to having you again.
Delight.
I'll be right back, and we'll dive into the topic of death. What did John Travolta have to say with the death of his wife? And specifically talking to his son, as his son has had fear about his own father dying. We'll also dive into the topic of Muppet Babies and how they're now promoting cross-dressing for children.
We're talking about what you're thinking about. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
John Travolta recently did an interview talking about death, and specifically how he had to talk to his 10-year-old son about death after his son's fear of his dad also dying after the death of his very own mother, Kelly Preston. We'll talk about that in just a moment here on Trending, but I want to first talk about a highly disturbing story. And the story is this. Who of you maybe grew up with the Muppets? and the show The Muppet Babies. From Kermit the Frog to Miss Piggy. Well, The Muppet Babies has a new agenda. This is, can I just say, yet another reason why we got rid of our TV before we had the baby. I've been wanting to since we got married. It took my husband a little longer to kind of jump on the bandwagon. And why we don't have our child watch shows. Or even look at screens for that matter. And this is just a glimpse of what you as a parent, or even if you're not a parent, what you, all of us as a culture need to be aware of is truly a brainwashing of society. You need to listen to this. So I have 2 clips for you. Let's start with the initial story. So this is Gonzo. You may remember the character Gonzo. Well, Gonzo has quite the predicament. And his fairy godfather, fairy god rat father, whatever you want to call him, is going to solve it. Listen.
Hey, Gonzo, you okay?
Not exactly. I really wish I could wear one of those princess dresses to the ball.
Well, I hate to see a good pal feeling bad. So tell you what, I am gonna grant your wish. Because I am your fairy rat father!
Leaping Leatherworth! I didn't know you were a fairy rat father.
Well, you never asked. Anyway, I'm gonna make sure you have the perfect dress to wear to the ball.
But the girl said I'm not supposed to wear a dress. I don't want everyone to be upset with me.
Well, if it makes you feel better, I can make your outfit so amazing, they won't even know it's you.
You mean it? All right then, let's do it!
Wow. Okay, if you had not heard this audio, this is from the Muppet Babies. So Gonzo then is transformed by his fairy rat father and is transformed into wearing this beautiful dress. Yes, Gonzo is cross-dressing for babies to watch. Gonzo is cross-dressing for little kids to watch. And are parents okay with this? Do parents just think, well, it's just a show, you know, it's no big deal? Okay, maybe it was no big deal 20 years ago when it was funny in a movie when someone was maybe a cross-dresser or identified, or didn't even identify, but was considered a drag queen at times. Remember, people laughed at that even just 10 years ago? I think anything prior to Bruce Jenner having to do with drag queens was a joke. Now it's brainwashing children in the Muppet Babies. Gonzo's character, they're ruining. But listen to how brilliantly they do this. Gonzo says that he really wishes he could wear a dress to the ball. And he tells his fairy rat father that he isn't going to because the girl said I shouldn't, one, and he doesn't want to upset anyone. Did you hear that? And now here Gonzo is feeling bad. And the fairy rat father says, well, I don't want to leave a pal feeling bad, so I'm going to help you out. Okay, everything about this is a big red alert. It's telling kids that anything goes, we should accept everything, that there should be no norms, there should be no rules. And in fact, I'll show you just a little bit of that when I play for you another clip. But before I play that other clip, so Gonzo goes to the ball. And all of a sudden, all the other princesses, all the girls see Gonzo, and it's like this wow moment. Gonzo's incredible. And they don't really know what to do. Specifically, I think the fairy godmother or whoever it is that's leading all the little Muppet Babies. And she's saying, well, you know, you can curtsy. And so Gonzo doesn't know how to curtsy. So being a typical boy, Gonzo goes running backwards, does a backflip, throws his arms out and says, ta-da! What's significant about this? It's a total boy reaction, okay? So now we're saying, okay, wear the dress, but don't actually assimilate. Be yourself, be unique. Don't actually curtsy. It's giving all these messages of it's all about you. You do whatever you want, even if it's not necessarily respecting and obeying the rules. In fact, this is actually showing disrespect. And this has been a theme for years in a lot of, for example, Disney shows. Even Nickelodeon as well, but especially Disney, where you see this intense kid power to the extent that it's disrespectful towards parents, disagrees with parents, does whatever it wants. I remember I wasn't allowed to watch the show Lizzie McGuire growing up because she was disrespectful toward her parents. Yet for some reason, that's what all of the shows empower, and what even Muppet Babies is doing by undermining authority and rules. And yes, even social norms. But social norms aren't a bad thing. Now, if you're in Scotland and Gonzo wants to wear a kilt, great. However, that's not the story here. So listen to this, because then what happens is they're talking about princess training, and now all of a sudden they're talking about, well, we're missing Gonzo. And in fact, when they ask Gonzo what his name is, because they don't recognize Gonzo at the ball, they then are asking, and Gonzo says, oh, I'm Gonzarella. So they're doing this play on Cinderella. And then Gonzo leaves his shoe behind, and they're talking about this beautiful looking princess, and they don't know who it is, and they wonder who it is. And now here, listen to this second clip of the Muppet Babies promoting cross-dressing.
There you are! You missed our royal ball! We met the most amazing princess! But they ran away, and all they left behind was this.
Everyone, there's something I need to tell you. The princess who came to your ball tonight was me. I'm Gonzarella.
But Gonzo, why didn't Vu tell us?
Because you all expected me to look a certain way. I don't want you to be upset with me, but I don't want to do things just because that's the way they've always been done either. I want to be me.
Oh, Gonzo, we're sorry. It wasn't very nice of us to tell you what to wear to our ball.
You're our friend, and we love you any way you are.
Yeah, of course we do.
Yeah.
I say we get rid of this old royal handbook and make a better one.
And in our new handbook, everyone can come to the ball dressed however they like.
Yeah!
Okay, there's so much to say here. Where do I start? Okay, first of all, did you notice the beginning of the clip in the Muppet Baby? By the way, this is a Muppet Babies promoting cross-dressing. Gonzo's fairy rat father just turned him into looking like a girl, and so he was a real drag queen showing up for the ball. Then they suddenly realize Gonzo's gone. They don't know where Gonzarella went. And did you notice it was said, we don't know who this was. They ran away using the politically correct pronouns for someone who identifies as whatever they want or whatever they're confused about. Then they go on to make it clear that, well, he didn't come to the ball because he was expected to look a certain way. But then they make it really clear. It wasn't nice of us to tell you what to wear. Let's get rid of all the rules. Everyone's welcome. Everyone can wear whatever they want. Anyone can do anything they want. Well, how far does this go? This is the same idea. Who am I to tell you that you shouldn't use whatever bathroom you want? Who am I to tell you that you shouldn't sleep in separate quarters for sleepovers? Remember, during President Obama's administration, the whole bathroom policy also made it at that time so that if you were on a school field trip and a boy identified as a little girl, that he has a right to sleep with all the little girls. Warning. Same with locker rooms and everything else. You need to understand that this is the challenge. It's not just a kid's show where a kid doesn't understand what's happening. This is brainwashing. This is manipulation of a child's mind to say rule books should go out the door. Someone should be accepted and loved no matter what, which they should be, but they should be able to do whatever they want. There's a difference between loving and accepting a person and loving and accepting and approving a behavior. And there's a reason why we have rule books. Yeah, so you're expected to wear a dress if you're a girl to the ball in the Muppet Babies. Okay. Well, let's say it doesn't matter if you wear any clothes to the church. Should we do away with all rules and go to church without wearing any clothes? Should we do away with rules and suddenly say that kids don't have to wear shoes anywhere they go? Well, no, that would be ridiculous because kids play really hard outside and they could hurt and cut their feet. And you would scandalize people if you went to church without any clothes on. There's a reason for rules, and we should respect them. Social norms, social cues, but for some reason we think it's okay to make a joke in Muppet Babies about a cross-dressing gonzo who has a fairy rat father who taught him that gender confusion is okay. This is also what's at the heart of the story, that there's nothing wrong with gender confusion and being confused about how you want to dress and what you want to do. I need you to listen very carefully right now. More than 8 out of 10 kids who struggle with gender dysphoria, if left on their own, if not ushered into an LGBTQ community or identity, work it out and end up identifying with their biological sex. More than 8 out of 10 kids. Some studies show as high as 9 out of 10. Here's the reality. This will not be the norm anymore if we have television shows such as Muppet Babies from a young age telling kids who are confused about their gender identity that they should just do whatever they want and hang maleness and femaleness. The church will be the last one standing when it comes to speaking about femininity and masculinity, respecting authority, and following rules that have to do with our biological reality. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. I wanted to have a discussion about fear with regard to death. In fact, John Travolta, you may have followed the story back in 2020, his wife Kelly Preston died of cancer. They also tragically lost their son, one of their sons, at the age of 16. I believe that was Jet. Now, that was at a family vacation. So the Travolta family has experienced a tremendous amount of loss. And I was just listening to John Travolta doing an interview where he was talking to his son Ben, who's 10 years old, about fear surrounding future death. Listen to this.
He said to me once, he said, because Mom passed away, I'm afraid you're going to. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, it's a very different thing. And I went through the differences about my longevity and her limited life. I said, but Ben, you always love the truth, and I'm going to tell you the truth about life. Nobody knows when they're going to go or when they're going to stay. I said, your brother left at 16, too young. Your mother left at 57, that was too young. But who's to say? I said, I could die tomorrow. You could, anybody can. I said, so let's look at life that it's part of life. You see, you don't know exactly. You just do your best at trying to live the longest you can.
The experience and knowledge that comes from said older individual.
That's so true.
It's priceless.
Priceless.
This is priceless. I don't have enough money to pay for this information. I don't have enough money to pay for a genuine conversation of honesty.
This is a fascinating conversation from a Catholic perspective, because here John Travolta is, who's lost his wife. She was so young, the age of 57, after battling cancer for 2 years. And also lost his son at 16. He has 2 surviving children. And the youngest, Ben, literally said, because Mom passed away, I'm afraid you're going to too. Sometimes I think our challenge today with the topic of death and not wanting to talk about it, not wanting to face the reality or prepare ourselves with it, is out of fear. Fear of losing the relationships we have here on earth. Fear of final judgment. Fear of how we will die. The fear of decay of the body. Yet, juxtaposed to this, we've celebrated the feast day of a few recent saints who died rather young. St. Rose of Lima, St. Maximilian Kolbe. I think even of St. Maria Goretti, died at the age of about 12 years old. What wise wisdom, what wisdom and kind of nuggets did John Travolta have that even the interviewer was saying, like, you can't pay for this. Nothing can give the value of this conversation you just had with your son. Death is certain, and that is part of what John Travolta was teaching his son. It's a part of life, as he said. And there's no guarantee as to the time of our death. So the question for us as people of faith, in listening to these words of John Travolta and how his interview about death has made its way onto the cover and onto the stories of every Hollywood commentator's perspective of, wow, John Travolta has had these words of wisdom about death. Well, how can we take it a step further as people of faith? That we should not fear death. That we should have hope in the resurrection. Confidence in reconciliation. That we run to the sacraments and anointing of the sick for ourselves and our loved ones toward the end of their lives. Recognizing that death is certain and that we will take nothing with us to the grave. I hope that John Travolta's perspective and reminder that death is a part of life will be a reminder for all of us. As it's so easy for us to be consumed and fearful of death, of illness, of crisis, but we're called to be faith-filled, to be hopeful, and to recognize that we're created to be with God no matter what day He takes us, today, tomorrow, at 80 years old, at 25 years old, that we've lived our best life, choosing Him, seeking Him, and most importantly, remaining in a state of grace with Him, in union with God, in union with the church. Let this be our reminder today to start scheduling confession a little more regularly so that we might receive our Lord and be with Him in the life to come.